Isabella Thompson didn't know how much her world was about to change until she saw her husband marry her sister. The rain poured down, creating a dull roar as it battered the windows of the small apartment. Inside, Isabella sat, her hands trembling around the edges of a glass of wine she hadn't touched in minutes. She couldn't stop replaying the scene from earlier that day, the wedding she had been forced to attend, despite knowing deep down that it was wrong. The sight of her husband, Chris, standing at the altar, smiling at her sister, Olivia, as if she had never existed. Olivia, the sister who had always been the golden one, the perfect one, the one who never had to fight for attention, the one who always knew what to say and when to say it. Isabella took a slow sip from her glass, the bitterness of the wine mirroring the sting in her chest. She had watched the love of her life say, "I do" to someone else, someone who didn't deserve him, someone who had never struggled the way she had, never fought to be seen, to be heard. And yet, here she was alone. But something felt off. It wasn't just the heartbreak, it was a deeper unease, like an itch she couldn't scratch. As she sat there, staring at the empty glass, she felt a presence at the door. Looking up, she froze. Standing in the doorway was a man. He wasn't someone she knew, and yet, there was something familiar about him. His tall frame and dark, impeccable suit screamed power, but it was his eyes that made her pulse race. Piercing, calculating. He seemed to look right through her, as if he knew her soul. He stepped inside without a word, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air like a shadow. "Are you Isabel Thompson?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. She nodded, unable to speak, her heart pounding. "Good," he said, his gaze never leaving her. "I've been looking for you." The words didn't make sense, but they echoed in her mind as if they carried more weight than she could understand. "I don't know you," Isabella said, her voice shaking slightly. "You don't need to," he replied, his voice colder now, with an edge that sent a chill down her spine. "But your family does. And that necklace you're wearing, it belongs to me." She blinked, confused. What was he talking about? She had no idea what he meant. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, standing up, instinctively taking a step back. "I didn't ask for this," he said, a slight smirk curling his lips as he took a step toward her. "But it seems I have no choice but to involve you now." Isabella looked at him, her heart racing. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's simple," he replied, his voice low. "You're not just anyone. You're tied to something much bigger than you realize." The man didn't offer an explanation, but his eyes, those cold, piercing eyes, seemed to see something in her, something hidden deep within, something she hadn't yet figured out about herself. She looked down at the necklace she wore, the one she'd had since she was a child, the one her mother had given her before she died. It had always felt like a part of her. But now, as she stared at it, she wondered if it was more than just a piece of jewelry. Was it a link to a past she didn't understand? Was there more to her family than she had been told? Before she could ask another question, the man stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I'll explain everything. But for now, you belong to me." Isabella swallowed hard, fear mixing with confusion. She didn't know what this man wanted, or why he was here, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was never going to be the same again. Isabel stood frozen, the weight of the stranger's words pressing down on her. He had said she belonged to him. And though she wanted to argue, to push back, the way he looked at her made it clear that no protest would matter. His gaze was sharp, unyielding, as if he could see through her defenses. He stepped closer, and she instinctively took another step back, her pulse quickening. "You have questions," he said, his voice steady, almost rehearsed. "But right now, I'm not here to answer them. I'm here to make sure you understand your place in this world." Isabel swallowed, her throat dry. "I don't understand," she whispered. "What are you talking about?" He paused, his expression hardening. "You're more than just your sister's shadow. More than just the woman who watched her marry your husband. I've been looking for you, Isabel, for a long time." His words were like a puzzle piece clicking into place in her mind, but she couldn't quite see the full picture. He was speaking as if she were someone else, someone important, someone she didn't recognize. Her mind raced, searching for answers. "I'm nobody," she said, the words feeling hollow as she spoke them. "I don't know what you want from me." The man smiled, but it was cold, detached. "No one is nobody. And you certainly are not nobody." He stepped back and gestured to the room around them, as though he were showing her something more than just the apartment she had lived in for years. This is just the beginning, Isabel. You're a part of something far bigger than you've ever imagined. You just haven't seen it yet. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, but Isabel couldn't grasp what he was saying. What could she be a part of? The woman who had just watched her life fall apart in front of her? The woman who had just been humiliated in front of her family and friends? I'm not. I don't belong in your world, she said, shaking her head, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. He raised an eyebrow, his expression turning slightly amused. You don't get to decide that. Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine at his words. It wasn't the words themselves, but the certainty with which he spoke. There was no room for doubt, no room for resistance. I'm not a part of whatever you're talking about, she insisted, but this time, it felt weaker, less convincing. The man stepped forward again, his presence filling the small room. You will be, whether you like it or not. That necklace you wear? It's not just some trinket. It's a symbol of your connection to a past you've ignored for too long. Isabel glanced down at the necklace, the one her mother had given her all those years ago. She hadn't thought much about it, not since she was a child, but now, it felt different. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You'll find out soon enough, he said cryptically. But for now, you need to come with me. Isabel wanted to resist, wanted to run, but something in the man's eyes stopped her. There was no mistaking it. He was not someone she could easily escape. You're not asking, she said, her voice shaking. You're telling me. He nodded. Exactly. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized that whatever path she had been walking, it was no longer hers to choose. The moment she had stepped into this man's world, her choices had become something else entirely. I don't even know your name, Isabel said, her voice small, almost childlike. You will soon enough, he replied with a faint smile, his eyes never leaving hers. And when you do, you'll understand why I'm the only one who can help you. Isabel felt the weight of the man's gaze like a heavy blanket suffocating her every movement. He hadn't told her much, but everything about him screamed that he knew something she didn't, something she needed to understand if she was ever going to make sense of the mess her life had become. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the pendant, her mother's gift that now felt like a chain. He was waiting for her to speak, but what could she say? She barely understood what was happening, let alone how to process it. Where are you taking me? She finally managed, her voice almost too soft to hear. He gave a slight shrug, his expression unreadable. To a place where you can begin to understand. His words made no sense, yet they carried a weight that made her feel like she had no choice but to follow. Isabel opened her mouth to protest, but the sharp look in his eyes stopped her. There was nothing she could say that would change his mind, and she knew it. As if reading her thoughts, he stepped closer. You're not as powerless as you think, he said, his voice low. But you need to trust me if you want answers. Trust him? After everything that had happened? After watching her sister marry her husband? After seeing her life fall apart in an instant? How could she trust a man who appeared out of nowhere, claiming she had some destiny she knew nothing about? But then again, something about his certainty made her question herself. Maybe she had been wrong all along. Maybe her life wasn't as ordinary as she thought. Maybe she was meant for something bigger. I don't even know who you are, Isabel whispered, her voice trembling slightly. But I know who you are, he replied, his voice unwavering. And I know what's coming. That's why you're here. He turned away from her, moving toward the door. Isabel hesitated for a moment before following him. She had no choice. She didn't know what else to do. She had lost everything, and now, it seemed like she was being pulled into a world she couldn't even imagine. The door shut behind them with a soft click, and the chill in the air seemed to deepen as they stepped into the unknown. The man led her down a dark hallway, his footsteps echoing against the walls, a reminder that she was no longer in control. The further they walked, the more she realized how little she understood. She had been living in a bubble, in a world that now felt so far removed from reality. This man, with his cold, calculating eyes, was about to shatter that illusion. What is this place? Isabel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This is the beginning of everything, he replied, his tone matter of fact. The world you thought you knew? It's just the surface. You're going to learn what lies beneath. As they reached a large, ornate door, The man stopped and turned to face her. His gaze softened, but there was no mistaking the intent in his eyes. Isabel, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about the legacy you were born into. It's about the choices your family made long before you ever knew their name. He opened the door, and Isabel stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was dimly lit, with high ceilings and intricate tapestries hanging from the walls. A large desk stood at the far end, and behind it sat a man she didn't recognize, another figure who seemed to command the space around him with an ease that made Isabel feel small. This wasn't her world. This was a world she didn't belong in, yet somehow, she knew she was being pulled into it, whether she liked it or not. The man at the desk looked up, his expression neutral. "Isabel," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "Welcome to the family." Isabel stood still, her breath caught in her throat as the door clicked shut behind her. The room was vast, dimly lit, and far more extravagant than anything she had ever seen. Rich tapestries lined the walls, their intricate designs whispering of old money and power, while the high ceilings made her feel smaller, as though she were a mere speck in a world she didn't belong to. The man at the desk, the one who had welcomed her into the room, was the epitome of calm and control. His sharp features were framed by a silver streak in his dark hair, and his eyes, a piercing gray, never left hers as he studied her. Isabel's heart raced, and she instinctively took a step back. "Sit," he said simply, his voice smooth, almost too calm. She hesitated for a moment before lowering herself into the chair across from his desk. The air between them felt thick, like the calm before a storm. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. The man continued to look at her, his gaze never faltering, as if he were waiting for her to speak first. Finally, he leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk in front of him. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice steady. "Your presence is necessary for what comes next." Isabel blinked, confusion clouding her mind. "What comes next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your life," he replied, his tone unreadable. "Everything you thought you knew about yourself, about your family, has been a lie. This is your chance to understand what you were born into." Isabel swallowed, the weight of his words settling on her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do I have to do with any of this?" He smiled, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything," he said simply. "Your family has been part of a much larger picture, Isabel. And now, it's time for you to take your place in it." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. She couldn't find the words to argue with him, not when everything he said seemed to make too much sense, as though she had been blind to the truth all her life. He stood, slowly, as if he had all the time in the world, and walked around the desk toward her. His presence loomed over her, and despite her best efforts, she couldn't look away from his steady, unblinking gaze. "You've been given a gift, Isabel," he continued, his voice softer now, but still commanding. "A chance to see things for what they really are. Your necklace," he said, his eyes flicking to the pendant she still wore, "is the key to understanding everything. It's a symbol of your connection to a family legacy that's been hidden from you." Isabel's hand moved instinctively to the pendant, her fingers brushing against it as though it might hold some sort of secret. "I don't understand," she whispered, her mind racing. "Why me? Why now?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back and motioned to the room. "You'll understand soon enough," he said. "For now, know this. You are not who you think you are. Your path has already been decided, and it's time for you to begin walking it." He turned away from her, and for the first time, Isabel felt a strange sense of finality in the air. It was as if a door had been opened, and there was no going back. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The world she had known felt like a distant memory, replaced by a new reality that she didn't know how to navigate. All she knew was that she had been thrust into something bigger than herself, something that would change her forever. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice shaky but determined. The man paused, glancing over his shoulder at her. "Your trust," he said, "and your understanding. Once you have that, everything else will fall into place." He turned back toward the desk, signaling that their conversation was over. Isabel sat there for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her, before standing and walking toward the door. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she couldn't turn away now. Not when everything was changing, and not when she had no choice but to face the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. Isabel stood motionless as the door clicked shut behind her. The weight of the man's words still hung in the air, lingering like a dense fog she couldn't escape. His promises, his confidence, everything about this moment made her feel as though her entire life had just been ripped open, exposing her to a truth she never saw coming. He had called her part of the family. But what did that even mean? She had always been an outsider in her own home, watching from the shadows as others lived their perfect lives. But now, everything had shifted. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with all of this," she murmured to herself, her fingers lightly brushing the pendant around her neck. It felt foreign now, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. The man's presence had been overpowering, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos brewing inside her. Isabel couldn't ignore the unease she felt about the world she was being thrust into. She had never asked for any of this. She didn't know why her family had been part of something bigger, something so much darker than she could have imagined. She had spent her whole life wondering what was missing, and now it seemed like she had finally stumbled upon the answers. But they were nothing like what she had expected. The tall man with the cold gray eyes had told her the world she knew was just a surface. But what did that mean for her? And who was she really? The thought made her stomach turn. There has to be more to this, she thought, standing up and walking towards the window. The city lights outside seemed so distant now, as though they belonged to a world she could no longer reach. Isabel's life had just been turned upside down, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she would ever be able to go back to the way things were. She thought about her sister, Olivia, and her husband, Chris. They had seemed like the perfect couple, and now Isabel was left to pick up the pieces of her broken heart, all while trying to figure out what her own role was in this grand, mysterious puzzle. As she stared out the window, deep in thought, the door opened behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "You're thinking too much," the man's voice broke through her thoughts. "That's your problem. You want answers, but you're not ready for them." Isabel turned, her gaze meeting his. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to do," she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "You're already doing it," he replied, his tone as measured as ever. "You just don't realize it yet." He stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "You're part of this now, Isabel, and there's no going back." His words were not a threat, but a statement of fact, a cold reality that she could no longer ignore. Isabel felt the weight of his gaze, and for the first time, she realized that this wasn't a life she could walk away from. There were no more choices to make, no more easy answers. The man was right. Her life had been altered in ways she couldn't yet understand, but there was no escaping the path she was now on. "You've made your choice," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "Now, you'll see the truth for yourself." Isabel's mind raced, but her body stayed still, as if frozen in place by the gravity of the moment. She had no idea what was coming, but one thing was certain: her world would never be the same again. Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking deeper into something she couldn't control, but every part of her screamed to understand it. The man with the cold eyes had said she was part of something bigger, something more complex. But what did that even mean? She had lived her whole life in the shadows, always on the outside looking in, and now she was being pulled into a world she didn't recognize. She had come to this point unknowingly, and now it seemed like there was no turning back. The man, whose name she still didn't know, had been right. Her life had already changed, and the realization was settling in like a weight she could no longer ignore. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked softly, breaking the silence that had surrounded her for the past few minutes. The man didn't immediately answer. He seemed to be measuring her, like she was a puzzle he hadn't quite figured out. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady. "You'll have to make your own way, but you won't do it alone." Isabel's brow furrowed, confusion clouding her mind. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, his tone softer now, "you're not just any woman, Isabel. Your family's legacy has been hidden, but it's a part of you. Your choices from here on out will shape everything." The words hung in the air, heavier than she could have ever expected. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she processed what he was saying. What was her family involved in? What was this legacy she had no idea about? She had thought she knew her family, that her life had been ordinary, nothing special. But now, it seemed like there had been a world beyond her reach all along. She stood there, absorbing the man's words, her heart pounding in her chest. "And what happens next?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He gave her a look, almost as if he had been expecting the question. "Now you learn. And you choose." Isabel wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't want any part of this, but the man's gaze silenced her. His eyes, those piercing gray eyes, were full of something deeper, something she couldn't quite understand, but it felt like power. It made her feel like she didn't have the luxury of choice anymore. "Your family has been involved in something for years. It's time you take your place in it," he continued. Isabel felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. "But I'm not part of that world," she said, shaking her head, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. "You are," he replied, his voice unwavering. "Whether you believe it or not. Your connection to it is undeniable. Your destiny was decided long before you were born." Isabel's hands gripped the edge of the table, her mind racing. "I don't want this," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to reject the world he was offering her or rejecting herself for being a part of it. The man stepped forward, his gaze intense. "You don't have to want it, but you have to accept it. The choice is yours, but it will be the last one you make in the world you know." His words were final, and Isabel felt the last threads of control slipping from her hands. The weight of her family's secrets, her unknown legacy, pressed down on her like a wall closing in. What did it all mean? Why had this been kept from her? The questions buzzed in her mind, but no answers came. Only the cold certainty that she was now bound to a fate that had been waiting for her all along. "What now?" she asked. Again, her voice small, as though she was asking for permission. "Now," he said, his voice calm, "you find out who you really are." He turned away, and Isabel followed him, the weight of his words still heavy in her chest. As they left the room, she couldn't help but feel as though she was walking towards something she couldn't escape, something that would define her future, whether she was ready for it or not. Isabel's heart raced as she followed the man through the corridors of the mansion, each step feeling heavier than the last. The rooms they passed seemed to close in around her, filled with luxurious furniture, priceless paintings, and statues that seemed to watch her every move. The grandeur of the place only made her feel smaller, more insignificant. She didn't belong here. This wasn't her world. She had never asked for any of this. Yet now she was forced to walk deeper into a world of secrets and power that she couldn't comprehend. "This is it," the man said, stopping in front of a large, ornate door. Isabel paused for a moment, staring at the door, trying to gather her thoughts. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You meet the people who will help you understand, who will guide you through what's coming." His words left her with more questions than answers, but she had no choice but to follow. She couldn't go back to the life she had known before. It had been shattered the moment she had stepped into this world. With a single, deliberate movement, he opened the door. Isabel stepped inside, feeling the weight of everything that had brought her here pressing down on her. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the soft glow of candles placed around the edges of the room. A long, polished table stood in the center, surrounded by men and women in expensive suits. They looked up as Isabel entered, their eyes assessing her in a way that made her feel like she was being measured, analyzed. One man, sitting at the head of the table, stood up. He was older than the others, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes held the same cold, calculating intensity. Isabel could feel the power radiating from him, a presence that commanded respect without a single word being spoken. "Isabel Thompson," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "Welcome to the family." The words hit her like a punch in the stomach. This wasn't some metaphorical family. This was real. These were the people her life had been connected to without her even knowing it. She had been thrust into their world, a world filled with influence and danger, and now there was no going back. Isabel tried to steady her breathing, but it was impossible to ignore the rush of emotions flooding her chest. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't belong here." The man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was calculating, almost amused. "You belong here more than you know. You've always belonged here. Your family's ties to us go back generations. This is your birthright, Isabel. Your destiny." Her mind raced. This wasn't just about some family legacy. This was about her, about her place in a world she didn't even know existed. Her head spun as she tried to process the weight of his words. "But I don't want this," she said, her voice growing stronger, though she wasn't sure if it was defiance or fear pushing her. "I didn't choose this." The man's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You don't have to choose it. It's already been chosen for you." His words sank in like a stone, settling deep inside her. She was trapped in this world now. There was no escaping it, not when every path seemed to lead back to them. He motioned for her to sit at the table, and Isabel hesitated before finally taking a seat. As she looked around the room, she realized that she wasn't just among powerful people. She was surrounded by those who had the power to control her life. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she remained still, knowing there was nothing she could do to change what was happening. The man at the head of the table spoke again, his voice calm, as if he were giving an order. "From this moment on, Isabel, you will learn what it means to be a part of us. You will learn what your family has been involved in, what we've been building, and why you are so important to it all." Isabel wanted to protest, to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't deny what he was saying. She could feel it. The pull, the sense of something greater, something she couldn't escape. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, barely believing the words herself. The man nodded, as if he had been expecting her to say it. "You'll learn. You have no choice." Isabel sank into the chair, her mind reeling. There was no way out. Not now. This was her reality now, and she would have to find a way to navigate it. But as she looked around the room, she realized something. She was no longer the girl who had watched her life fall apart. She was no longer the outsider. She was a part of something bigger, something dark and powerful, and she had no idea what it would mean for her future. The room was heavy with silence, each person at the table looking at Isabel as if they were waiting for her to speak, to make some declaration of acceptance, but she had nothing to say. Her mind was a whirl of confusion, a storm of questions she couldn't even begin to articulate. The man at the head of the table, the one who had welcomed her into this world, watched her with an air of calm expectation, as though he knew exactly what she was thinking. "You'll need to learn control," he said, breaking the silence. "The world you've been thrust into doesn't tolerate weakness. You've always had the strength, Isabel, but now you will learn how to wield it." His words sent a chill down her spine. Strength? What strength? She had been running on autopilot for so long, just trying to get by, trying to survive. But now, it seemed like everything was changing, everything about her life, her identity, her family. She had never felt more lost. "Control?" Isabel echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt the weight of the word, but it didn't make sense. She had never been in control of her own life. How could she learn to control anything else? The man nodded slowly. "Yes, control is everything. You'll learn to make decisions that affect not just you, but those around you. This is bigger than your personal feelings. This is about your legacy, Isabel. The legacy that has been kept from you. The legacy you will now take on." His words were heavy, each one like a stone sinking deeper into her chest. Legacy? What did he mean by legacy? She hadn't even known her family was involved in anything beyond their simple, mundane life. Her father had always kept to himself. Her mother had always been the quiet one. There had been no signs, no clues that there was something darker lurking behind the veil. Isabel felt herself shrinking into the chair. "I didn't ask for this," she murmured. "None of this." The man at the head of the table's gaze softened just slightly, though his expression remained stern. "You don't have to ask for it. It was never your choice to begin with. You were born into this, Isabel. The sooner you accept it, the sooner you can take control of it." His words felt like a punch to the gut. She had no choice. It wasn't about what she wanted or didn't want. She had been swept into something that she couldn't escape, something that had been waiting for her since the day she was born. "I don't know how to do this," Isabel admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't even know what this is." The man stood from his chair and walked over to her, his footsteps measured and deliberate. He paused beside her, looking down at her as if considering something. "You don't need to know everything right now," he said. "But you will. In time. You'll learn the rules of this world, the power dynamics, the people who control it, and most importantly, how you fit into it. You're a part of something much bigger than yourself. And it's time for you to understand your role." Isabel looked up at him, a sense of dread pooling in her stomach. She didn't know if she could do this, if she could fit into this world. But what choice did she have? She had no control. The more she tried to grasp the situation, the more she realized how little she knew about her own family, about her own past. "What do you expect from me?" she asked quietly, though she feared the answer. "I expect you to rise to the occasion," he replied without hesitation. "I expect you to take the place that has always been waiting for you." Isabel's heart pounded in her chest. There it was again, that feeling of inevitability. "What if I can't?" she whispered. The man looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then you'll fail," he said simply, "and this world will move on without you. But if you choose to accept it, to take the power that is yours by birthright, then you will find a world that respects you. You will find a place where you don't have to feel small anymore." Isabel sat in stunned silence, trying to process his words, trying to understand what this all meant. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: she was no longer in control of her life. The world she had known, the world of ordinary people, had disappeared. In its place was something far more dangerous, more powerful, something that would consume her if she didn't learn how to navigate it. The man's final words echoed in her mind as she sat there, paralyzed by the weight of the choices ahead. "It's up to you now," he said. "You can choose to rise, or you can let this world swallow you whole." Isabel sat at the long table, the weight of the man's words still hanging in the air. She had been given a choice, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a path she had no control over, a path that had already been paved for her long before she could even understand what it meant. She could feel her heart racing, the fear creeping up on her again, and yet there was a part of her that recognized the truth in what he had said. She wasn't in control anymore, not of her life, not of her future. The world she had known, the life she had fought to create for herself, had slipped away, replaced by this darker, more dangerous reality. The man's words had shaken her, but what scared her more was the realization that she was beginning to accept them. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was a player in this world, whether she was ready or not. She looked up at the man again, trying to steady her breathing. His eyes, cold and calculating, held her gaze. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice calm, as if he were asking her to confirm something she already knew. "I understand," she said quietly, the words coming out more easily than she expected. She didn't know what it meant, not fully, but she knew enough to understand that this was a world she couldn't escape from. "Good," he said, his lips curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You'll learn quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner you'll see the power you can wield." Isabel swallowed hard, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "Power? What kind of power?" The man's smile faded as he turned away, his focus shifting to the others in the room. They watched her closely, their eyes narrowing as if they were sizing her up. "This is your first test, Isabel," he continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. "It's not about proving yourself to me. It's about proving yourself to them." He gestured to the people seated at the table, each one seemingly more powerful than the last. Isabel's pulse quickened. She had no idea what kind of test she was about to face, but she knew one thing for certain: there was no room for failure here. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this world, but the thought of going back to her old life was unbearable. What had she left behind? Her sister, her husband, her old life. It was all gone, erased in the blink of an eye. Now, she had to figure out how to navigate this new reality, how to survive in a world that operated by its own rules. "What do you expect me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man didn't look at her. Instead, he spoke to the room. "She'll learn soon enough," he said, his voice carrying a sense of finality. "But for now, we wait. The next move is hers." Isabel felt her breath catch in her throat. She had no idea what move he was talking about, but she knew it was coming. The weight of expectation hung heavily on her shoulders, but there was no escaping it. She had been thrust into this world, and now she had to find her place in it. Her thoughts raced, but she pushed them aside. She had no time for fear now. She had to act. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. The man turned back to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We'll see," he said. "You'll find your way. But know this: if you